Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Discovery Pod with Eve. I am Eve Richards, along with my co-host, Tony Blas. We are excited to have you with us today. We've got an exciting show with an amazing guest. So we cannot wait to introduce this wonderful guest with us today. Tony is an incredible actor. He's also a marketing professional. And fun fact about Tony, did you know that Tony actually introduced the first karaoke machine in the US? So Tony, welcome. Tell us something about you that we don't know about.
Well, you just told my big story about karaoke, so I don't know. I just try a lot of new things. I do marketing, so the thing I love about it, it's always something different. And,
Amazing.
So
I was just thinking, we've gone through a very difficult period, with COVID. What lessons could you share with our audience? Obviously, this was a global pandemic. So what lessons do you have from that?
Well, we did lose a family member, and so there was a lot of difficult times, a lot of fear. But I think what I came out with was that, it reminded me that I'm not getting any younger, and I do want to make the most of the time that I have left.
Amazing.
And so that's when I got back into acting.
Wow, incredible. So, when I look back, I'm very fortunate that none of my family members got sick or friends. However, what I learned from that experience is the resilience of trying to do different things because, as human beings, we want to go out and socialize. So not having that ability was a little bit scary, but I used that time just to get better. I did a lot of reading, and so it's a reminder how precious life is and the freedom we have. I am really excited about our guest today. He's incredible. I can't wait to introduce him. Have you had a chance to do any research on our guest?
I haven't. It's just mind blowing. I think Bran is an example of the kind of person I was thinking of. Yes. That has been as a result of the pandemic. People are doing so many different things.
Yes, that's a good segue. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited to introduce our amazing guest, Bran Ferren. This man went to MIT at age 15. He's actually the modern day version of Einstein, I think. Gosh, when I look at what he's done, he's a visual designer. He's a vehicle designer, visual effects artist. One of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business. He's actually co-founder and creative officer of Applied Minds. And did you know that he actually was president of research and development at the Walt Disney Corporation?
Wow.
Yes. The list goes on, right?
Yeah.
Gosh, he also pioneered technologies and staging concepts for music legends like Paul McCartney, David Bowie. Oh my gosh!
David Bowie? Wow.
Yes.
He's my favorite.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor, my pleasure to introduce someone who is a mentor to me, a friend, Bran Ferren. Welcome to the Discovery Pod with Eve.
Thank you, and such a pleasure to be here.
So, okay, you've had an amazing life, but let's start at the beginning, if you don't mind. I'm told that you visited the Parthenon in Rome when you were just 5 years old with your parents. Do you remember that trip? And if so, how do you think it affected you?
Well, I remember that trip, but also the Pantheon, which is the one that
Oops.
was particularly relevant. But, as part of my career, I was the second person to introduce karaoke to the United States. So this is to be expected. Working on Paraguay now.
Wow.
But, for me, that was, I had wonderful parents, both artists. My dad was an abstract expressionist, my mom an impressionist painter. And every summer they would drag the family to the great wonders of the world. And, I think our family Bible was Europe on $5 a day, which was the starting point. But my dad spoke perfect French and was quite worldly.
Wow.
And so seeing the wonders of the world and being, I was probably 6 at that time, all of that was great, but it was just kind of normal stuff. When you grow up around art, you grow up around other things, you've seen a Doric column, an Ionic column, and a Corinthian column, and after your dad taught you all of those things, it's just more columns. And so seldom did one of these great wonders really get my attention in a way that's memorable. But the Pantheon was different, and it was a very hot day in Rome, and you walked in and it was cool. That was unusual because there's not a lot of air conditioning in 2,000-year-old buildings. And speaking of 2,000 years old, it's the longest continuously occupied building in recorded history that has done the same thing, which has been a temple to all the gods, Pantheon, for its entire duration. And I looked up and there was a big hole in the roof, which was unusual because, I looked down and there were drain holes. So apparently they thought about this. But what was fascinating to me is looking up at the modern roof. I had learned about Buckminster Fuller and geodesic domes, and this was a very impressive roof. And it clearly had forced perspective, which my dad had taught me was developed during the Renaissance, but this was a 2,000-year-old building. So I assumed this was one of those bombed out during a war and they'd put a new roof on it, because you see a lot of that. And it's interesting in cathedrals in Europe. You'll see stained glass replaced with white glass. Well, that's to acknowledge in the past that was a damaged, bombed building, and they didn't replace it in a way that emulated the others. Others have taken other choices. But for me, I asked my dad, what about that ceiling? Because he had told me about how to make big churches and cathedrals. You need flying buttresses, and the shape of this, and what a catenary is, and what a hyperbolic curve is, and all of these things, which was interesting. But this didn't have any of those. And in fact, it had a hole in the middle, which means it can't be applying the load in the same way. And so I was going to say, long story short, it's too late for that. But for me, I said, so when was this roof done? And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, modern roof, when was it put on? He said, that's the original roof. And that was an epiphanal moment for me, long before I knew the word epiphanal. And it was interesting because, first of all, it was the first time I realized people were smart thousands of years ago. There's not a lot of evidence of that, right? And you look at a pyramid, you can pile a bunch of rocks up and make a pyramid. You just need a lot of people and a lot of time. But you don't get a clear span, 154-foot or whatever roof by piling up a lot of rocks. And it used concrete, and I didn't realize there was concrete then. In fact, I learned later it used various densities of concrete, lightweight concrete with volcanic pumice at the top, getting to heavier aggregates down the bottom. So it was a moment for me that, first of all, I realized that there is a rich history to this world beyond what was superficially visible. Wow. 2, the power of this one shaft of light coming through and illuminating various things in the space really taught me about light as an object. And I realized that without light, you can't see anything. And so therefore, lighting design is actually quite a relevant discipline, as equal in value to architecture in its most basic form. Wow. And that moment, I would say, changed my life in a way I didn't realize then, but it gave me a series of perspectives about the importance of history and preserving history, about that. The idea of designing a church with a hole in the roof, which meant it's the first church I'd been in that had an unrestricted view of God, or in this case, gods. Wow. So That was pretty cool. And the idea that it was cool because, in fact, the heat rises through the hole and it's naturally convective cooling and all sorts of things throughout my life. I've learned.
You saying that if we would just rip off this ceiling and put a hole in there, we wouldn't need all this air conditioning?
Well, you would need less air conditioning, but it's even a little more complex, and I'm sure that's exactly what you wanted, is more complexity in this conversation.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm following every word, believe me.
Yes.
Especially those columns. I mean,
But it turns out that the thoughtfulness of a space like that, and you tell me how intentional it was, but if people are sufficiently clever to design a roof like that, the roof heats up, it gets hot air rises, the rising air goes up, it creates negative pressure, which causes cool air to come in from down below. So it's either a great guess or
Yeah.
aliens arrived and came up with this concept, or it was great engineering.
Wow. So, great segue
Into
my next question.
Yes.
I actually thought I knew a lot about you over the years I've gotten to know you. You've talked about having a very close relationship with your grandfather, who actually had a sheet metal kitchen cabinet factory in Brooklyn. And on the weekends, you used to visit his shop as a child. Looking back and thinking about both parents, your mom, Ray, and your dad, John, they were both incredible artists. You had uncles who were engineers. I would have expected you to become an artist. Did your grandfather give you a totally different perspective from art? It's a twofold. First, did he give you a different perspective? Second, what life lessons did you learn from him? And last, what legacy did he leave behind?
Well, let me try to give you a simple answer to a complex question.
I love that.
11. No. But I think, look, I was lucky to have loving, caring parents who all had interesting and complex lives, and I benefited from, by extension, from those experiences. So my dad, an accomplished artist in a significant number of the major museums all over the world, etc., Bran Ferren. And my mom, again, lovely painter, which actually started as a student of his.
Wow.
So I thought
did not know that.
Interesting complexity. But for me, what was so interesting is I had one uncle, Uncle Roy, who was director of flight test for North American Aviation, and then Rockwell did the X-15 rocket plane and the XB-70 Valkyrie and a whole collection of groundbreaking aircrafts. The X-15 set records which still haven't been broken, interestingly enough.
Oh.
And my other uncle was one of the chief recording engineers at Columbia Records.
Wow.
And if you are fans of Miles Davis,
Yes, love him. His
you
music.
go to Kind of Blue and such. My uncle recorded that and
Wow.
did Bob Dylan's first album.
Oh, my
and
gosh.
Frank Sinatra and Barbra Streisand and so
Impressive.
forth. So I grew up around these people, so that was all normal. I was always equally interested in art and design and science and engineering. School counselors tell you, kid, you got to get serious and make your mind up. It turns out you don't have to make your mind up. It's now accidentally getting kind of trendy. I was the first person in the United States, I believe, to have the title creative technology when I was at Disney. I don't know if that's true, but Wikipedia says it's true, so
Yeah.
it must be true. But acknowledging that those two mains are there, and this is a town where if you look at the visual effects business or the gaming business or the theme park business, clearly you collide science and engineering with art and design all the time.
Yeah.
It's not as typical in other places, and it was not typical when I was interested in this and going to school. There were no courses in this. There were some interesting starting gestures. Nicholas Negroponte, who later founded the Media Lab and good friend to this day, came up with the idea of the architecture machine and how do you start applying computers to design and such. Well, in 1970, that was a new idea, and there was no equivalent of how that happened. So what my grandfather did was, and first of all, to answer both your second and third at the same time, he taught me resiliency because he was first generation in the United States. He and his wife, Rebecca, came from Hungary, Romania, Middle Europe, and came here to escape Nazis, and we had family members killed in the Holocaust and so forth, which interestingly enough, they never talked about. And that was a time where you didn't talk to children about these horrors. And of course, the only way you prevent them from happening again is by talking about them. But that's not what happened then. I learned about it later. But he came and became a lawyer. And once he became a lawyer, the Great Depression happened. And during the Great Depression, there was no work for lawyers. His first client apparently paid in chickens. 2 chickens was the going rate at the time. And so then he helped with the war effort, and then he became a high school principal and did that. And then he invented the inexpensive sheet metal kitchen cabinet, which post-World War and, that whole generation of coming back and Levittown and all of those other things that were designed to accommodate this new wave, which later created baby boomers and such as myself. So resiliency, he taught me about mechanics and machines, and he was self-taught. He didn't go to school for engineering or, product design, and set up all the machines himself and such. And so I had great encouragement from all directions. We were not a wealthy family. My dad was an artist, and this was at a time when artists didn't make millions of dollars, et cetera. And it turns out, unfortunately, if you want to do well in the arts, dying sometimes helps, which is not necessarily the best path. But so from my perspective, I was surrounded by art, surrounded by design, surrounded by people who encouraged my curiosity. The interesting thing was where I would usually butt heads with school. And I remember I had a room filled with surplus electronics. My grandpa would take me down to Cortlandt and Canal Street, where the World Trade Center then happened. And all of that was great, and I had a room filled with it. And I remember if it was school, I wasn't that interested. And the schools were saying, you got to stop them from playing with all this electronic stuff and all. So the idea was taking it away from me so that I wouldn't actually learn about what ended up being my profession. But school was not a good match for my interests. And it's not a matter of being smarter, bored, or, any of those things, but it's just I found I learned better on my own. Wow. I learned about film production by working for nothing on film productions and just hanging out and being useful. And then all of a sudden they realize you might do something else, or, gee, something broke on the set, so you fix it. And you earn your way in. Recently, California labor laws, David Letterman decision, et cetera, you can't hire people for nothing and have them work, which is a problem because most productions can't afford to spend a lot of money on people who are junior and don't know how to pull their own weight. And so it eliminated one of the pathways of how you get into businesses like theater and film and so forth. So
does that mean no more internships?
No more unpaid internships.
Wow.
I thought those were some...
It turns out it is very easy to get hired if you work for nothing. Yeah. And so you want to get hired, you want to work in, you can show up, appear reasonably bright, don't drool too much, and, say, hey, I'd like to learn about what you're doing. Can I just hang out? And I don't mind sweeping floors or doing this or whatever's there. Mm-hmm. And as you do it, you earn your way up and show what you can do. Yeah. And from a practical point of view, that's how I learned about theater. It's how I learned about film. It's how I learned about visual effects.
Wow.
And it's very hard to do now. We have many people who apprentice at our company and interns, but I pay them minimum wage. We actually pay them better than minimum wage. Wow. But from a practical point of view, that limits to how many people I can have, because ultimately you/your customers and clients are paying for that educational process. So I think often there's legislation which is well-intentioned but can end up having the opposite effects.
Wow. That was amazing. Amazing to learn about your grandfather and how he inspired you.
So I was going to ask you about your time at MIT being very young, but it sounds like you weren't there that long?
Well, I had just turned 16 as I got there, and I was there for a year. Okay. And I had asked, my dad had died. He died just before I went to MIT. I was really going to school as much for my parents as anything else. My dad was an educator, and so he taught art and art theory and painting and so forth, well regarded. It was ultimately chairman of the art department at Queens College. And he used that, one, because he cared about passing it along, and two, to supplement his income, because, selling art, challenging way to feed a family. And so from our perspective, that set of experiences very formative. When I went to school, it was more about a rigid structure, and you would take a class in history, and rather than understanding the relative sequence of the events that gave us civilization, if you got the date wrong of when the Peloponnesian War started, you're wrong. And so for me, rote memorization of that rather than understanding an overall appreciation for history, which interested me, was a problem. I was told by my mom that I was not interested in reading until she introduced me to Popular Mechanics, Popular Science, and Scientific American magazines back in the day when we had these things called magazines. And then she couldn't stop me from reading, because for me, that was relevant. I was learning things that was interesting and exciting to me. And so I just always found that being in a real work environment doing things. And I was always attracted to things like special effects or film or theater or rock and roll or sound, or things that combined both the artistic side as well as required technical skills to be able to execute it. And whether that's in visual effects, showing people things or getting them to believe things that didn't happen did happen. And of course, in film, you can take probably the first visual effect, which is a dissolve or a cut. Well, when people first went to movies and the fascination of the novelty of the technology, this is Cinerama being run over by a train, that was entertainment. Ultimately, you needed this thing called story to capture people's imagination as an extension of storytelling, which I would argue, contrary to popular rumor, is in fact the world's oldest profession, and the tradition of storytelling. And storytelling is how we remember things. We remember pictures in time. If I say Statue of Liberty, you get a picture of the Statue of Liberty in your head. If I say World Trade Center, you get a picture of that and planes flying into it and thinking about where you were during 9/11 and a whole clear, because it's how we remember things. And so the art and science of storytelling, to me, being engaged firsthand, was just a better path than school was. And my mom said, hey, if that's what you really want to do, that's fine.
Amazing. That's great that you had such supportive parents. So,
and by the way, MIT is a great school.
Oh, it is
and
a great
I
school.
valued and treasured the time I spent there. I have lifelong friendships from people I went to school there with, and it's a great institution. I think the key is what works best for each individual. It's just like learning to become an actor, as both of you did.
Yeah.
There are a whole variety of methods. And, are you a Meisner devotee or what type of method or this or that? And a lot of people say, well, method is just dumb. I'm going to learn this and I'm going to learn classical British, how to be a dramaticist. Well, whatever works is what matters. And over time, your thinking evolves. And as you get good at your trade, you pick up things by watching and observing other people and so forth. Now, I think it's great if someone in a formal program on anything finds that's the best way to learn. Just didn't work out that way for me.
Good for you. That's a great approach. So you've achieved so much. Again, as I mentioned, you're the modern day Einstein.
Well, I don't believe that's accurate.
Well,
and
anyway.
from my perspective, I'm barely getting warmed up.
Wow. Incredible. So how do you define success? And has that definition of success evolved over time?
Well, I don't define success, so that's the starting point.
Okay.
I don't think about myself that way. Mm-hmm. I think about doing new things and showing people new things. And people often ask me, what's the favorite project you ever done? And the answer is always the next one, because that's it. And I am not a fan of nostalgia. I don't keep journals. I don't believe in any of that. And my view is very simple. you're only here for a very short period of time.
Yes.
Now, you may have another model that you're going to turn into a chipmunk or, something else and have a new life.
I like that.
I think we're here once, gone. See you later. And by the way, if I die and end up at the pearly gates, I will be the first one to say, "Gotta hand it to you. I didn't see that coming." But let's assume for a moment that's not the case. Well, you're only here for a short time.
Yes.
And the older you get, the shorter you realize it is. And it's interesting because, when you're young, time seems to go on forever. And as you get older, you're sort of taught about responsibility and this and that, and time gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And the value equation shifts from time is free and it's all about money. We teach kids by an allowance and this, and you want something, you have to have money. So initially, time is worth nothing and money is what it's all about. Mm-hmm. And then as you move forward, you may approach spirituality, you may do a collection of other things. And trust me, 10 minutes before you drop dead, time takes on a whole new meaning. And we have built these institutions whose sole function it is to trade money for time. They're called hospitals in the medical system. The more money you have, the more time they can give you. So that's the way it is. But to your earlier question.
Sorry, I was going to ask
yes.
you. I didn't think you were getting older. I thought it was the other way around.
Yeah,
I thought you were getting younger.
I'm like
right?
Merlin.
I'm drifting sideways. But I think that as you look at these questions, to me, every bit of time you spent looking back or journaling your life or reading your journal or doing that is time you're never going to get back to do new things and move forward. And so my sense is I just don't have interest in being nostalgic about my life or what I've done or patting myself on the back. I've never been happy with anything I've done. There is not one thing I've ever done or been part of that I couldn't have done better.
Wow.
And so each time I try to do better.
Interesting.
But speaking of money, you were at the Walt Disney Company for some time, and I know that said you were a CTO, so you were maybe focused in that area. But at some point, I believe you were advising Michael Eisner.
Well, Michael and Frank Wells are who brought me there. I'd never worked for anyone before. They bought a company I owned, and I went along with the office furniture, basically. And,
you've got a great sense of humor.
Well, and so I had a great relationship with him. One of my jobs was a little like DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Their charter is to avoid surprise. Mm-hmm. So you ought not be surprised by technology developments of people who might not think well of the United States. That's what that agency does. And its job is to get the best and the brightest, to creatively think about where the future of defense is, et cetera. From my perspective, that was similar to my job at Disney, is to make sure we're not surprised by other competitors in the industry doing things that we should have been doing, but we were asleep at the switch. Part of that was to make sure that our executives, starting with Michael and Frank, were aware of where the future is, how it might impact us and such. And so we would build things like demonstrations, set-top boxes, interactive television. We knew that was coming, but we're talking about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we knew that was coming. So we would fill rooms with computers to emulate what the power of a little set-top box would be. Moore's Law gives you a pretty good idea of where you would be in compute power. We had a lot of talent, so we went to Oprah, and we went to Ted Koppel, and we went to Peter Jennings, and we went to these folks, built 4 to 8 hours of interactive television so you could sit in a room and experience what now you can do. And what video on demand would be, and that we built music delivery into the home long before iTunes or the equivalent of that existed. We built what we called the Disney box, which now you'd call a PlayStation or a PS. You would call it a variety of things which are now computer or computer-based gaming. None of that was possible then, and so our job was to build this out. We built the first digital cinema installations where we actually took over for Lion King, the original Lion King, the El Capitan Theater, which we owned, and we put in our experimental fully digital projectors, and we ran both for invited guests in the production community as well as unknown audiences. We ran it in full digital before anyone had ever heard of digital cinema. And the idea being, this is coming. How does it affect production, distribution? How does it affect our cost model, making prints, not making prints? What issues would there be in piracy and all the other things that are directly affect being in the movie business? Mm-hmm. So our job was to get ahead of that and show that. And then a lot of the other work product was novel technologies for new attractions in the theme parks, wow. because that's where a lot of the forward-facing new technology for Disney would end up. Yeah. So it was developing new ride systems, imaging systems, experimenting early with virtual reality, the Aladdin ride, a whole variety of experiments which were designed to help teach our creative community what the options are for doing better storytelling, and then at the same time inform our executives who have to make key decisions about the direction of the company that. So it was great being there. I had a seat at the table with key decisions to provide,
wow.
This is a good idea, this is a bad idea. They didn't always listen to me, but they should have. Just kidding.
I love your sense of humor. So I'm going to take you back to the 15-year-old kid. I look at my life when I was 15, and I look at yours. You started a company at age 15, Syncronetics. So, how does a 15-year-old start a company? And looking back, what challenges did you have? Lastly, I know you've had such inspirational parents and grandparents and uncles. Did you have others who inspired you to start your company?
Well, the company started because I was just doing things for people, whether it was fixing things or doing audiovisual installations, or at the time I was creating special lighting effects for discos, which were popular at the time. What comes after the mirror ball, and how do you make that exciting, and how do you have electronic systems which can listen to music and control lighting directly for a variety of effects. Now, again, that doesn't seem like anything now. Yeah. Then there wasn't technology to do that, and so that. And so the company just came about saying, well, people giving me money, I'm doing business, I should probably figure out how this works. How do you start a company? One of the reasons to start a company was, as a kid, to have a little more credibility. So whether you're talking to vendors or talking to customers, they're dealing with a real company rather than some kid. So some of it is you spend the first part of your career attempting to look older, and then the last part of your career attempting to look younger. So, there's one perfect age. I'm not sure what that moment is, but we should all celebrate it. We should have perfect age day to, I've climbed up the hill and I'm ready to head down the other side. So the company was really just a mechanism to formalize a little more what I was doing, and then eventually hiring some people because, and by the way, you should always hire people who are smarter, better, and more talented than you are.
Wow.
There's an old saying which A's hire A's and B's hire C's. And there's a lot to it. And if you want to be successful, hire people who are better, smarter, more adorable. You pick any parameter that you think is important.
How do you do that? Would you have any employees?
Well, the challenge is, how do you capture people's imagination in such a way that they think your vision is sufficiently compelling that it's worth their time to come help you?
Wow.
And so, thinking about where you're going and what you're doing and what we can do. I mean, I have 3 very simple rules of business, and they've evolved over the years. But the current rules of business are: 1, only work with people you like.
I like that.
Because life's too short to work with jerks.
I like
and
that.
When you're younger, you don't have that option. It's
Yes.
called, I have to eat.
Yes.
And in order to do that, it all follows through. So you'll work with anyone. But you learn over time that the business term, the opportunity cost of working with awful people
Yes.
is never worth what you get paid. So
Yeah.
work with people you like. 2, try to do things that make the world a better place.
Wow.
And by the way, that can be bringing a family together in a theme park and making them smile and create a lifelong positive memory. I mean, I always thought it was interesting. I had people who would say, why are you going to Disney? You know, you can do so many other things. And I said, well, you know, the idea of creating a positive view of the future and bringing people together doesn't sound so terrible in the whole scheme of things. And I can tell you, as compared to anywhere I've worked or people I've worked with, when I would say, oh, I'm at Disney and all of that, people would give you 10 minutes about their last experience at a theme park.
Wow.
Now, the people who would criticize you, for example, New York traditional theater crowd, you know, why are you doing this Disney stuff?
Yeah.
And of course, if you ask if you've ever been to a Disney theme park, the answer is more often than not, no, I would never go there.
Yeah.
So often the opinion is second or third person. But, and by the way, I respect that. I mean, for a lot of people, Disney's not for them. Great. But what was, for me, significant about it was that putting a smile on a child's face, being able to do things that give people positive outlooks, get them to understand they could have impact on things in the world as individuals, and do that, that was a privilege. The challenge is, how do you be effective at doing that? And so when people would criticize and say, it's not the real world, the answer is, of course it's not the real world. You want the real world, stay home. Yeah. That's the real world. Go out on the street. That's the real world. So maybe we can do better. The next and most important thing, which is often overlooked by people, but you know, once you have, do good things and make the world a better place and do whatever. And again, it's not a matter of solving world hunger. It would be nice if you can do that. But a whole bunch of people doing smaller incremental things adds up to make a difference, especially in outlook. And then the final, I have a very antiquated business model, which is frowned upon in many circles, and that is make more money than you spend. Not fashionable in the, you know, gee, our
Tech
business
sector.
strategy is our exit strategy. But, you know, if you're going to add value to the world, you know, get paid for it, and that allows you to hire people, and that allows them to feed their families and do all of that. And so I've just always thought that you have a real responsibility to the world, to the community, to the people who work for you. And it's challenging. There are those times when you have a business reversal, you have to lay people off. It's painful to do that. I'm proud to say in the history of our company, we've never missed a payroll, which is rare in our industry. But, you know, you work hard at it. And there's often an asymmetry. People who work for someone think that person is getting rich off of all of their hard work and so forth, which may very well be the case. But I can tell you from the other side, your house is on the line and everything you own. And if you get a big reversal, you're personally guaranteeing all of that stuff. And it's nice to be able to say, oh, it's a corporation, you're isolated from that. You cannot be in business today and get a loan, a mortgage, or anything else without personally guaranteeing it. So the idea that you're insulated from that is just nonsense. So you feel an obligation, but you also feel a pressure that if things go wrong, look at the industry that you're all in, what happens when there's a strike. Or look at what happens when there's COVID. So you had a plan. You're not getting rich, but you're getting by and all of that. And then all work goes to zero for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or that.
It's a ripple effect.
These are difficult businesses. And for the same reason in the arts, people look at the artist whose work is selling for millions of dollars. Well, there are a handful who do that. And I think that's great. And it gives everyone hope that you could be one of them. Just as there are actors who have, you know, above the line deals which, you know, would make most people's eyes water. At the same time, the other 98% of all of these people are either getting by or barely getting by. And so that's why, you know, you have a trust to the people who work with you. And I don't say work for me, because to me, we're all in it together. And you do your best for them and vice versa. And if you structure it well, and you're thoughtful about how the world changes, and this is the most important one, you're lucky, things go well in your direction. Otherwise, you get to use your survival skills and try to figure out plan B through R.
Incredible lessons.
Absolutely. I don't know where we're at in the time, but before we get to the end, I would like to ask you about David Bowie.
By all means.
Just have to.
Nice
Do you
guy.
mind?
Excellent answer.
I think we still have plenty of time,
Okay.
so we have some questions here that we can just. I think we've got time, so I think the next question is yours.
This could go on for
I'm
11
just going to
hours.
skip
Who
over.
would-
No, I think
to
we should-
Can I
yeah.
just skip over to David Bowie? I'm just curious because his what little I know about him is that he also is had interest in technology as well as art and as well as how work was presented more than just as singing a song.
Well, he started as a graphic designer and artist, so he was interested in how everything looks. And there are some people you work with who are like that. I mean, if you look at Laurie Anderson, worked with Laurie Anderson a lot, and
Paul
she's just a
McCartney.
wonderful creative talent, but involved in every aspect of the production. David Byrne. You look at people who are great artists and have made unique contributions by moving in new directions. They're inventive. Well, if you're going to work with them, your job is to help them realize their vision or help make their vision better. So you ought to be able to introduce to them new possibilities. Laurie and I have done collaborative art pieces together, piece for the Guggenheim, and she's just a delight to work with, but also such a gifted musician. And from my perspective, it's all about the personal collaboration and can you build a creative bond with these people so that you can take their art and help them elevate it to the next level.
Incredible. So, Bran, it's been incredible having you here. We could go on and on and on forever. In closing, I have a question for you. If you could have dinner with any three people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
It would clearly be the three people at this table
Aw.
because that way I don't have to overthink it.
So, thank you, Bran, for joining us today to ignite the flame and curiosity and sharing your wisdom. I know you do a lot of speeches and people would be interested in coming to listen to one of your fabulous presentations. So for our global, worldwide audience, please check Bran out to see what he's working on appliedminds.com. And again, Bran, thank you. It's been amazing. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.
Privileged to join you
Thank you.
and have dinner later.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Well, the smokehouse is right down the street.
Exactly.
Yes. So, Tony, it's been such a wonderful, session having Bran. I've learned so much from him. I thought I knew him, but it's like I'm always learning something new about him. And I hope just by listening to him, this would inspire our audiences worldwide to challenge themselves and do different things.
Well, I think the thing I took away most from the interview was that you can be super successful in many, many different ways, and you don't have to be put into a category with a CV that makes sense. Because I know that my CV has never made sense.
Yes.
And people always ask me, well, how do you do this and that? What do you specialize in? So I feel a little more confident in being able to say, I just do what interests me at the time when it interests me.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you everyone for watching us. Tell your friends to watch us on our YouTube page, the Discovery Pod. We are also available on Instagram, Twitter. Watch us every Thursday. You could also download each episode on Spotify, Google, or anywhere that the podcast is available. Again, thank you so much and see you next week.